A little after 1 in the morning on the 25th of November 2025, the southeastern Kyiv radar sector no longer displayed the sky. The entire scan sheet was swallowed by an echo mass so dense that target contours had fused into a single moving slab of metal. The P-18 tightened its beam. The 36D6 lowered its elevation scale, but all they could see was a wall stretching for dozens of kilometers, sliding straight toward the outer kill box, inside the C2 bunker. Warning algorithms fired relentlessly, signal density exceeding threshold, classification collapsing almost instantly. The system no longer recognized individual UAVs, only a volume pressing down on the low-altitude corridor, so thick that every safety parameter began flashing red. As the wall closed in on the kill box boundary, the conclusion became unmistakable. If even a thin slice of that mass slipped through, Kyiv's infrastructure belt would flare like an overloaded circuit board. The night of the 24th into the early hours of the 25th of November, 2025, was not a harassment strike. It was chosen as a limit test. Precisely as peace negotiations mediated by the United States were underway in Abu Dhabi, after weeks of being hit at substations and transmission nodes, Kyiv had been forced to run its power grid in patchwork mode district clusters, lighting up one after another. Reserve capacity shaved down nearly to zero. Every Patriot round, every AIM-120 fired into the sky carried the weight of several more days on full alert. Moscow saw that gap and decided not only to launch cruise missiles and Kinsal, but also to send a UAV mass twice the size of any previous wave to force the air defense system into self-attrition. The southeastern corridor was chosen because it was the most familiar path. Terrain woven from open fields, industrial belts, tree lines, and high-voltage wires turned the airspace into an ideal interference tube for low-flying UAVs. Earlier waves had passed through here at scales of a few dozen. At most, a little over 100 frames, enough for both sides to learn from each other. On the night of the 24th into the 25th, Russia pushed more than 400 Shahed frames and fixed-wing UAVs into that same conduit. If Ukraine handled it as on previous nights, the wall would crush the air defense net before ever reaching its true target, Kyiv's ability to strike back in the coming nights, just as the winter-strained grid was reaching its limits. Before Kyiv saw even the faintest sign of the attack that night, Russia's operational engine had already surged like a machine climbing into its final revolutions. For hours. They gathered UAVs from 3 directions: Crimea, Bryansk, Kursk, driving them into a single intake route, internally known as the compression corridor. On the control screens, the airspace band from 50 to nearly 450 meters was shaded into pressure layers. Shahed 136 and Shahed 238 crept along the ground. Above them, fixed-wing He-Frag UAVs maintained constant speed, highest of all. Orlan 10 and Zala moved like turbines, keeping tempo for the entire formation. When these layers locked together, the formation no longer resembled hundreds of separate targets. It became a flowing mass more than 7 dozen kilometers long and nearly 3 kilometers wide, dense enough that Russia's own systems had to reduce display sensitivity to avoid glare. The intent was simple: compress the formation into a moving plane dense enough that Ukrainian radar could not pierce it, and long enough that any kill box would be shredded if reaction lagged even by a few seconds. It was like forcing a steel wall through a doorway if the door did not break. The hinges would. Kyiv did not see these preparations, but they felt the pressure in the way the data began to change its weight. In the lower deck of the C2 bunker, duty officers were accustomed to the southeastern corridor, but this night, something was wrong. The P-18 reported a thickening reflection floor in an unnatural pattern. The 36D6 sweeping the low layer saw both carpets of interference and dense pockets, as if the air itself were being compressed into slabs. RST towers around the urban perimeter fed back elongated, unusually thick thermal streaks far exceeding any known low-altitude UAV signature. Fresh streams of data poured in, showing a formation maintaining a three-tier structure with abnormal stability, the lower tier rippling with terrain, the middle tier holding steady velocity, the upper tier adjusting direction through small control pulses. These traits showed clearly that Russia was not using UAVs as scatter munitions, but was operating a shaped mass. And if it was a mass, then defensive doctrine could no longer function by breaking down individual targets, as on previous nights. Ukraine's kill boxes were therefore no longer static rectangles. In C2, they were treated as blades placed into space, the outer gate to fracture the shape, the middle gate to compress its thickness. The inner gate opened only when no alternatives remained. On the tactical map, these three layers lit up like three rungs of voltage awaiting impact. What thickened the air in the bunker was not the wall's appearance, but the speed at which its data fused. Each new radar frame only deepened it. Each new IR feed pulled it closer. A heavy, continuous mass was sliding in from afar, refusing to separate into discrete units as on previous nights. In that moment, all of Ukraine's preparation collapsed into one objective: tighten the net at the exact instant the wall made contact, not too early, not too late. Because even a few beats off would not merely let UAVs slip through Kyiv, it would make Ukraine's own air defense system collapse under the weight it had generated to keep the capital standing. At the edge of the outer kill box on the night of the 24th into the 25th of November, the invisible line between tracking and engagement disappeared within a single sweep. The UAV wall on radar, a dense echo band nearly 8 kilometers long, surged into the sector like a metallic flood. No more lone tracks, no more individual targets, only one mass from the very first contact. C2 had no room for tentative maneuvers. The hot points in the high band between roughly 350 and 450 meters, those Orlan 10 and Zala nodes pulling the communication spine, were marked as the living tendons of the entire mass. From distant firing grounds at the rear, PAC-3 launch lights flared, their vectors slicing diagonally across the corridor like fine blades. AIM-120C7 from NASAMS followed, chasing mid-tier clusters packed so tightly their separation had shrunk to only a few dozen meters. The first detonations occurred so high that the ground saw only faint sparks at the horizon, but on radar, the surface of the wall shuddered visibly. Segments of its spine were gouged open, clusters stripped of relay snapped off the main axis, drifting by small degrees, by tens of meters each second. Along the corridor, the once seamless wall began to show horizontal tiers, thinning plates. In a little more than a single minute, nearly 1/5 of its starting mass had been shoved outside the optimal lethal envelope, turning from a concentrated punch into a broad halo of noise useless to its true objective. But the remaining body still held enough mass to drive forward, with the crown cut away. The shoulders of the wall rolled past the outer kill box rim, pressing toward the middle gate. Here, the geometry changed entirely. The screen no longer showed a single solid echo creeping inward, but a body being split down its length. Using the freshly gathered data, C2 carved the wall into thick cells, each a few hundred meters long and wide, suspended like compacted blocks of pressure in midair. The middle kill box clamped around the outer substation belt like a vice. Iris TSLM and AIM-120 were assigned as the primary cutting blades, in the band between roughly 150 and 300 meters. Missile pairs punched into the densest cells where IRST reported engine counts per square kilometer reaching saturation. Each impact was not simply an explosion, but a rip the core of the cell blown out, fragments slicing into the outer ring of UAVs, making entire slabs of the wall collapse like concrete panels blistering off a dam. Amid the fragment haze, a detail emerged atop a section of wall still relatively intact. A secondary relay cluster protruded like a thorn. It surged power, trying to knit wandering fragments back into alignment, as though attempting to pull the mass toward a new, narrower, deeper attack axis. If it survived even a few dozen seconds longer, a fresh corridor could fully reopen amid the debris. Rather than wait for modeling, C-2 pivoted fire directly. A portion of PAC-3 rounds originally held for the inner layer was pushed forward, accepting a direct hit to strategic missile reserves to sever the node cleanly. The salvo raked down what remained of the spine. The relay cluster vanished. On display, the crown of the wall buckled, collapsing by a beat like a shattered dome. From that moment, everything below was forced to charge ahead blind. The second contact ended with the wall having lost roughly 4/10 of its density. Yet the body close to the ground still held enough mass to turn the substation belt into a chain of fire points if it slipped through. The middle kill box shifted into cleanup mode, dragging the fight down to direct line of sight. The third contact began. In the low tier, Gepard, ZSU-23-4, and ZU-23-2 had already been standing by. Short-range radar sweeping constantly for compact blocks, rushing in between 50 and 150 meters. Each gun line rotated into the narrow breathing gaps the geometry still left for the UAVs. When the remaining slabs of the wall surged in, the sky before Kyiv transformed into a dense mesh of fire with no white space left. 23 to 35 millimeter bursts lanced upward, slicing through UAV cells freshly dropped from mid-altitude. Each spray turned entire clusters into falling metal rain, scattering across open fields, tree lines, and warehouse roofs as short, heavy streaks of flame. On the western edge of the kill box, one UAV cluster attempted a final gambit skimming the boundary, slipping past the thicker firing lanes to arc around the outer rim, angling toward the gap between the industrial belt and the urban belt. On the C-2 interface, this offset vector appeared as a thin incision peeling off from the clutter mass. A mobile Gepard company was pulled diagonally across, erecting a low wall of fire exactly at the intersection of the predicted trajectory and the ground. When the UAV cluster nosed into the final curve, the space ahead was not an opening, but a block of fire. The first burst shredded the entire group into crossing streaks of flame. Not a single track made it past the industrial fringe. As the guns cooled and man-pads lowered their launch tubes, the UAV wall no longer held any operational shape. The original target volume dissolved into sparse clutter. IRST showed only small pockets of fire extending along the outskirts. The outer and middle kill boxes switched to clean status. The inner kill box never needed to open. Instead of a compression mass bearing down on the power grid, Kyiv was left with scattered burn scars and a night that, despite shrapnel impacts and blast waves across residential belts, kept its voltage rhythm intact. When the third contact ended, the middle kill box showed only fading heat traces. On the ground, more than 300 UAV wrecks lay scattered across a broad strip of broken fuselages. Warheads that never triggered, metal shards littering warehouse roofs and dirt roads. Several medium voltage lines had been knocked out by falling UAVs, causing local blackouts in a handful of outer neighborhoods. Some apartment blocks and homes along the perimeter suffered shattered windows, collapsed doors, and torn facades. The most important detail was what did not happen. No detonation struck the outer substation belt, where a direct hit could have inflicted between 20 and 40 million United States dollars in damage, not counting cascading load loss, with every hour of outage on the industrial rim imposing a $5 to $6 million cost. Post-battle simulations noted that if even a single target cell had closed a few seconds late during the second contact, a cluster of HEFRAG UAVs slipping through could have caused casualties among 200 to 300 residents living near the belt, along with potential loss of power, water, and heat for tens of thousands of effects that had, in fact, occurred in other Ukrainian regions that same night. Holding the line required a price the PAC-3, AIM-120, IRIS-T, SLM, and artillery expended across the three contacts equaled nearly 3 weeks of on-call reserves. In rough conversion, interception cost amounted to roughly $30 to $40 million expensive. but far lower than the consequences of a 330 kilovolt substation, igniting and triggering prolonged outages across the capital. Russia, meanwhile, lost roughly $15 to $20 million worth of UAVs in a strike that failed to generate any operationally meaningful impact on critical infrastructure around Kyiv, even though elsewhere across Ukraine, several urban areas still suffered hits and recorded casualties. All that remained on their radar was geometry torn apart, fully red, and extinguished just outside the city's defensive ring. As the outer and middle kill boxes shifted to clean status, Kyiv preserved both its infrastructure and the potential costs that the night of the 24th into the 25th had nearly turned real tens of millions in power grid damage. Hundreds of potential shrapnel casualties along the perimeter, and the very real possibility of a citywide blackout had even a single small error crept into the contact chain. At the operational level, the drone wall strike on the night of the 24th into the 25th of November 2025 was not merely an infrastructure raid, but a direct test of the limits of Kyiv's multi-layered air defense model, unfolding as Russia simultaneously launched roughly 22 missiles, including hypersonic Kinzhal, at targets across Ukraine. Moscow wanted an answer to a simple question: if more than 400 UAVs were pushed down a single corridor, could mass density alone break a network engineered to handle small, discrete waves? The result came back colder than anticipated. For Russia, a UAV wall worth $15 to $20 million was shattered entirely outside the urban perimeter, failing to create any operationally meaningful impact point on Kyiv's grid. The crush by quantity model proved it could stretch Ukraine's air defense to the edge of attrition, but not that it could pierce killbox geometry pre-shaped for each contact. For Ukraine, that night yielded something more valuable than the tally of UAVs shot down the complete motion profile of a full drone wall, how it held its layers, how relay nodes compensated when geometry tore apart, how density collapsed after each cut. All of it was stored as data to refine killbox thresholds, ammunition quotas for each layer, and the distribution of fire between PAC-3, AIM-120, Iris-T, and Gepard for the nights that followed. The exchange ratio told the rest. Ukraine burned roughly $30 to $40 million worth of interceptors to keep Kyiv lit and limit casualties, but avoided infrastructure losses that could have exceeded $100 million if even a single UAV cluster had slipped through the second contact and hit a substation. Russia lost a large UAV mass and gained only an almost non-existent probability of success on the Kyiv front, even if it still inflicted damage elsewhere. From the night of the 24th into the 25th of November, 2025 onward, every concept of using a drone wall to crush Kyiv must stand beside the same combat dataset. A thick wall can stretch an air defense net to its very limits. But if that net is shaped correctly and closed on the right beat, the wall has only one fate: shattering just outside the city's boundary.